Alrighty, guys, it's 4:33, so I will be a stickler and get us going now. I wanted to thank everybody for attending our first webinar hosted by PAT around retirement. And the catchy title is Should I Stay or Should I Go? A question I know a lot of you have been contemplating this year in particular. I am Peter Brogan. I'm Uniserv consultant here at PAT. I've been working for OEA and PAT now for a little over a year. And it's my pleasure to introduce you to Ed Foster, who is a financial consultant that's done a lot of work with our union and other educator unions for many years, and he's been an invaluable asset to us. Ed Foster is going to be speaking tonight for about an hour. I'm going to take questions in different parts of the presentation and then have a Q&A period at the end. Just in terms of how this webinar will work, it's not the typical Zoom meeting, so you'll only see me or Ed, and there's no chat function set up. But there is a Q&A feature that you can write in your questions and make comments, and we will make sure we get to those questions when the time is right. So having said that, I wanted to thank you guys and also let you know that we are recording this and we'll be posting it to the PAT YouTube page and our website at pdxteachers.org in the next couple of days. So if for some reason you can't be here for the entire thing or want to share it with a colleague, we will have video available to share. So with that said, I will pass the baton over to Ed, and Ed, take it away. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Peter. Thank you all for attending. I have to be honest, by way of a disclaimer, this is the first time I've done this. I feel a little bit like I'm sitting here talking to myself. So if it seems like I'm a little weirded out, it's because I'm a little weirded out. But you know, got to do what we got to do. So should I stay or should I go? That's the topic of the evening. Get that question a lot, and let's face it, it's been a year where that question has come up for a lot of people. I know that there are people watching who are familiar with who I am, but for those who do not, just a brief explanation so you know kind of where I'm coming from. I'm local, grew up here on the border of Tigard and Beaverton, actually, graduated from Portland State University with a degree in English. So of course I do finances now. And I've been in the financial services industry for about, 18 years. I'll be starting my 19th in January. I'm a registered representative, if you know what that means. It took me a while to figure it out, and I am one. And an investment advisor representative for Ster Advisors. They're my broker dealer. But the umbrella I work under is Foster and Associates. That was a company started by my father in 1981, and he just retired this year, as a matter of fact. So he managed to get down into Belize, and I think he's stuck there. So I work pretty closely with NEA member benefits, and as Peter said, I've been working with PAT, members of PAT for at least 15, maybe 16 of those 18 years. And I sit in with the membership committee so that I'm aware of what issues are affecting educators in the Portland district. My specialty really is PERS, which is kind of a big statement, but that's kind of where my focus is. And I think anybody that works with teachers has to understand how their pension works. So that's what I do. Personally, I'm married, 3 kids, 1 in college, 2 in high school, 1 dog, 1 cat that thinks it's a dog, and 1 regular cat. Enough about me. So this evening, what I'd like to talk about, and if nothing else, try to make you familiar with, is really how the pension, how the retirement plan works in Portland. And with that information, it can help you decide whether or not this is the year to retire. And if it's not, at least you'll know what to expect in the future. We're going to kind of do this in a stair-step sort of fashion. So we'll start with the district incentives and programs. Then we'll go out a little bit and look at PERS, talk about their pension, how it's calculated, and what options are available when you do decide to retire. We'll also include the IAP account with that, because that's kind of a separate animal. We'll look at some of the recent changes to PERS and when you can retire from PERS and all of that, and how you can work afterwards. And then going back to the original question, should I stay or should I go? You know, how much money do you need to retire? Can you retire is really the question. So hopefully we'll go some way towards answering that, or at least asking the right questions. So without further ado, we will start with Portland Public Schools. Portland offers a number of retirement incentives or benefits. Now, I'd like to give a little shout out to PAT. They've done a fantastic job of getting these benefits in the contract, and you can find them in Article 15 of the contract. A number of these were originally done through a memorandum of understanding each year, and frankly, it made for a lot of guesswork and difficult planning. And to get those into the contract is no small thing, and so they deserve every credit for it being there. Probably the biggest one, or the one people ask about the most, is the PERS bubble. Used to be called double dipping. I think that reminded people too much of chewing tobacco, so now they call it the PERS bubble. Let's take a look at that and we'll work out from there. What is the bubble? First and foremost, it's important to keep in mind that it's actually a PPS program. It's done through PAT and PPS. It's not a PERS program per se. So if you were to call PERS customer service and ask about the bubble, they probably wouldn't know what you were talking about. So keep that in mind. The easiest way to understand it is it really consists of 3 steps. You resign from PPS, you then retire from Oregon PERS, and PPS hires you back as a temporary employee for the remainder of the school year. So kind of a 3-step process. The easiest way to explain it is you retire from the district and continue to work the rest of the school year. But that's probably the best way to consider it. When you do that, you get to keep the same salary, same health benefits, minus the contribution currently being made to the IAP account. And we'll get to that a little bit later. But in terms of what impact it would have on you immediately, essentially none. You keep the same take-home pay, let's put it that way, and current health benefits. One important thing, though, is that when you do separate from service from PPS, they report all of your unused sick leave to PERS, and we'll talk about what's done with that a little bit later, but they reset your sick leave to 0. So you then accrue sick leave at that point of 1 day per month, something to keep in mind, especially if you have a lot of unused sick leave. The mechanics of it are pretty straightforward. The district requires what they call the district resignation form. I know it's on the HR website. There's some other places you can find it. If you have any trouble, I can help find it for you too. But they require that 30 days before your date of retirement from PERS. The reason for that is PERS retirements start on the 1st of each month. So they need to have, in order to retire from PERS, you have to be separated from service. So they need to have you retired from the district first. So they require 30 days to do that. If you're not doing the bubble and just retiring or leaving the school district, then they require 60 days. So keep those dates in mind. I know a lot of people are looking at January 1, for example, as their retirement date. Now, when you say that, what you really mean is January 1 is going to be your retirement date from PERS. So you would need to have your resignation form into the HR department by the end of November. So they have those 30 days. So hopefully that helps clarify what the bubble is. You collect at some point, you start collecting your PERS pension while you're still working in your teaching position for the remainder of the school year. Okay, so that's one district incentive. Along with that, well, I wouldn't say that. Another incentive is the retiree health insurance. 2 parts to it, one qualification, the other the benefit. To qualify for health insurance, the retiree health insurance through the district, there are a couple of requirements, and those are, first you have to be eligible to retire from PERS, and we'll get to that in just a moment. You need to have completed 15 years of service with the district by September 30th of 2020. Okay, doesn't have to be continuous or a consecutive 15 years. It just needs to add up to 15 years. And it has to be with the district. It can't be 10 years in Gresham and then 5 years at PPS, and now that's 15 years of PERS covered service, but it's not 15 years with the district. So that's one requirement. Another is that you need to be younger than age 65. In other words, not yet eligible for Medicare. If you're over age 65, then it's kind of a moot point because you'll be going on Medicare. And then the last one I'm putting in here because it's in the contract. I thought it was kind of interesting, actually. Clearly, it's an out for the Health and Welfare Trust if things go really crazy with healthcare and they can't afford to cover people. But eligibility or under such a plan, eligible for a plan then offered by the Health and Welfare Trust. So if pre-existing conditions, for example, become an issue, that gives them a chance to work with that. I haven't seen it actually come into play yet, but it's part of the equation. So you have to be eligible for one of the plans that the Health and Welfare Trust offers. To the best of my knowledge, everybody is at this point. Okay, so meeting those qualifications, what is the benefit? Well, the district pays 100% of the health insurance premium for the retiring member and 50% of the premium for the spouse or domestic partner. Does not include vision or dental, but those can be added. Would point out that it's fairly common because that's an additional cost out of your pocket to put vision and dental on there. A lot of people make it a point to get new glasses before they retire or significant dental work done before they retire. I advise doing that as well, but that's how that is set up. You'll also notice that the 50% of the premium for spouse or domestic partner says spouse or domestic partner. It doesn't say children. So if you do have children on your insurance plan, that's something to consider when you're going into retirement, as the district does not pick up that part of the bill. They can be added to your plan, but it would be out of your pocket. The benefit itself is for 60 months, 5 years, or until age 65, whichever comes first. As it's worded in the contract, it says a member who retires before age 60 will still receive the benefit, but it'll expire before Medicare eligibility. You can self-pay to continue that plan. So for example, let's say you retired at age 58, your benefits would expire in age 63, leaving you with a 2-year gap before age 65. You could stay on the plan, it would just be out of your pocket to do so. There was a point in time where you could switch that around and defer the district benefit and have them, because that's more expensive when you get older, and you could pay the early part of it and then pick up the 5 years from 60 to 65. But they did away with that option a number of years ago, actually. So now you start their benefit as soon as you retire and the school year is done. Okay. We're getting close to a point where we might be able to take some questions if we do that. But one more incentive, two actually. So those are probably the two big ones. The other one that comes up is what they call the early retirement stipend. And it's an interesting name. It's accurate, actually. But it doesn't mean that you've retired early. What it means is you're retiring earlier than you would qualify for Social Security. So before age 62. So it's called the early retirement stipend. It has the same qualifications as the health benefit in terms of being eligible for it. 15 years of service, able to retire from PERS, and so on. The benefit itself is $425 a month. That's a gross amount. Taxes come off of that. So you usually net in the 300 to let's say 20 range. And it's also for 60 months or until age 62, which is when you're first eligible for Social Security. So for example, if you were to retire at 57, you would be eligible to collect all 60 months of that. If you retire at age 61, you would only get 12 months of that because at 62 it stops. It's not earmarked for anything. I think the idea behind it originally was to help people bridge that gap, especially when they had to pay for part of their own health insurance before they could start their Social Security. So it was to help offset that. But it's not designated for anything. So I've seen people use it for other things as well, like car payments, helping out the kids, putting the kids on the insurance plan, that kind of thing. So it's yours to do with as you will. The other incentive, and it's not really an incentive for retirement per se, as it is an incentive to let them know that you're going to retire, as opposed to walking in the last day and just sliding in your resignation form and going, hi, so they can plan their FTE accordingly, is what they call the hire, assignment, and transfer protocol, early notice incentive. So even if you're not doing the bubble, but you know you're going to retire at the end of the school year, for example, the district is offering a $1,250, let's call it a bonus check, if you let them know before January 15th. If you wait until February 15th, that bonus decreases to $700. After that, there's no bonus. So unless you can think of a good reason that you don't want anybody in the district to know that you're going to retire, and I've seen that come up from time to time, but you do know that you're going to retire this year, then it makes sense to turn in your resignation form before January 15th. You can put whatever resignation date you want on it. So it doesn't mean you have to retire January 15th. It's just simply letting them know when you're going to retire at that point. Let's see. So at this point, that is essentially what the district part of it looks like. I'm going to touch base with Peter now and see if there's any questions I need to take a look at.
Yeah, we do have one question, and
Sure.
that person is a substitute educator and actually also raised their hand. So I'm just going to let them talk because they might have something they want to add to it. So
Oh, good.
I don't have their name, just comes up as mod. So just identify yourself when oh, I lost them.
Oh,
Guess they lowered their hand. But the question is relating to, if I retire from PPS as a substitute, can I still keep subbing without having to wait the 6 months?
ooh, that's a good question. I would need to check on the answer for that. And the reason for that is substitutes, as I'm sure most people are aware, are covered by a different contract. And I would want to double check that contract before I say anything. My inclination, the reason there's a 6-month waiting period, let me kind of backtrack a little bit on that, is it was originally there wasn't one. And then when the Affordable Care Act came out, the idea was they didn't want employers firing employees and then hiring them back right away with lesser benefits as a way to save money. So they put in place a 6-month waiting time so that when an employee leaves, there's a 6-month lag and then they can come back under a different benefit structure. So if substitutes are going to keep the same health plan, then there shouldn't be that 6-month waiting period. But again, I'd want to double check that. And I'd be happy to email that person back too, just, you know.
I had another person with their hand up, Krista. Krista, do you want to ask your question? You're on mute.
Okay, sorry, I hate this thing. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, sorry. Hey, I apologize. I was on my phone and I switched over to the computer. It was hard to hear. I'm confused about that thing about the health where you have to work 15 years total just with PPS. I thought I heard you say that you had to work it by a certain, like, 2020. Is that always good? Like, if I can crank out, like, if I don't die at my desk before I can crank out 15 years in Portland Public, will I still be have that benefit? Like, say I retire at like 2030 or whatever, will I still be eligible for that benefit to be able to get me that health insurance until Medicare or whatever?
That's an excellent question, actually.
Thank you.
What's interesting to me about that is that September 20th date has moved. It's back up a little bit. The benefit is a contractually negotiated item. And
Okay.
So it's been kind of this moving target. Originally it was 2018, and it's been walking forward as they've been working on trying to get everything all situated. The way it's worded in the contract right now is section 15.4, which is what we're talking about, shall expire 1 year after the successor contract is ratified.
Okay.
So if the provision going forward is not past the current date in the new contract, then no, that benefit would not be available. That is something PAT could negotiate with PPS. I would let your building rep know that that's something you would like to share and make it a priority for them. But as it stands right now, September 30th of this year is in fact the cutoff date for the 15-year mark.
And do you anticipate that won't be extended in that case? Because I got a ways to go before I can put enough time in with this district if I live that long, which
Honestly, I really don't. They may give it another year or so, but I know they've been trying to phase it out for a while now. And yeah, it's an expensive benefit. I mean, make no mistake about it.
we deserve.
It's a great benefit, that too. But I know that is something the district has been trying to
Okay.
grandfather out.
And does that count subbing too, or do you have to like actually be contracted like for like an actual full-time style?
Contracted is my understanding.
So subbing would not count toward that.
That is correct.
Okay, I will definitely be dead by then, so I'm fine with it. Thanks.
Sorry.
It's fine.
I had another question. I'll just read it out to you, Ed, from
Okay.
Alex Kwan. He wrote, if I decide to retire on December 1st and do the PERS bubble, but then for some reason he can't continue teaching and needs to resign after that, what would happen to all the benefits?
Well, that's a good question. Hi, Alex. I've been meaning to get in touch with you, actually. I got your email. I'll be in touch shortly. I don't know if I've ever had that question before. Because a person is a temporary employee, if you were to leave, it wouldn't impact your benefits. The way it's worded, they would probably not let you leave and then come back on the bubble, but it wouldn't do anything to impact your health benefits or the stipend, because those are really different, separate from the bubble, which is what you're talking about, retiring and potentially continuing to work the rest of the school year. So I would say no impact.
Great. You want to take a couple more, Ed, and then kind of move forward? And
Sure.
I had one from Elaine Miller. Are we grandfathered into the medical payment benefit? Could it go into the contract negotiations if we've opted into it? Does that make sense?
I'm not sure I understand the question, actually.
Yeah, me neither.
It
Are we grandfathered into the medical payment? I don't know. Yeah. Do you want, Elaine, you want to try to clarify what the question is?
well,
I think what you're saying is like, the benefits you just explained it, right? Like, could they disappear, if we lost them in contract negotiations?
that's a good question. There's two things I'll say to that. First off, when a person retires, they retire under whatever contract is in force at the time. So if you do the bubble, for example, and they haven't got a new contract in place yet, then there's no way it could impact it because you're retiring under the current contract. If the benefit is removed in the next contract, they wouldn't be able to retroactively go back and change the date. So as long as you have 15 years of service by September 30th of this year, it wouldn't matter if you retired this year or 5 years from now, you met that benchmark. Unless they put into the contract that they were going to sunset it out, and which, I'm sorry, now that I say that, it expires 1 year after the next contract. So that would give you about a year's wiggle time if it's not in the next contract, I guess would be the right answer to that. Right. I had to think on my feet on that one.
Let's take just two more questions, then we'll move on.
Okay.
So Stacy asked, how much does the vision and dental cost? If they wanted to opt into that.
You can actually get the specific numbers for that if you go to the Health and Welfare Trust website. If you Google Portland Public Schools Health and Welfare Trust, that's how I usually find it. And you can actually see the exact quote. Ballpark, I want to say it's in the $35 a month for the vision, and I forget what dental is, but it's not a whole lot more than that. So it's not, extraordinarily expensive.
And then last one for now from Rebecca Martin. She said, if I'm on a leave of absence, can I retire during my leave?
Can she retire when?
During her leave, while she's still out on leave.
Yes. On a leave of absence means you obviously wouldn't be doing the bubble then, right? Because you're on a leave of absence, but you could retire, absolutely.
Right. Thanks. All right,
Okay.
we'll take some more
And we
after.
can circle back. Maybe something will get answered as we go too.
Definitely.
One of the things to keep in mind is we've been talking about the district, and really there's two moving parts here. There's resigning from the district, let me put it that way, and retiring from PERS. When you resign from the district, you qualify for those benefits, potentially qualify for those benefits, retirement benefits, but really it's a resignation process. Whereas with PERS, it really is a retirement process. And that's what we're going to talk about next. It is possible to resign from Portland Public Schools, not start your pension with PERS. Again, that wouldn't actually be the bubble, but it is possible to do that. I have met educators who either were going to go work in a different school district or were done teaching altogether, but for a variety of reasons didn't want to start their PERS pension yet, and that is an option actually. The two are separate in that regard. But as we talk about PERS, kind of just again starting at the top and working down, just so we're all singing the same tune here, I'll start with the basics and we'll get a little more into the details here. PERS, as I'm sure most of you know, comes in essentially three categories. There's Tier 1, Tier 2, and of course they didn't call it Tier 3, they called it OPSRP. If you were hired before 1996, you're Tier 1. If you were hired between 1996 and the end of August of 2003, you're Tier 2. And after that, you are OPSRP. I've been in the business long enough now where I have seen the transition. A lot of Tier 2s retiring now. There aren't a lot of Tier 1s left. When I first started, it was mostly a Tier 1s game. I am starting to see some OPR SP retirements as well. So we call it the new plan, but if you look at the dates on it, it's been around for about 17 years now, which is like, holy cow. But there we are. So those are the three broad categories. Why do you need to know that? The difference between those tiers, there are essentially two differences. The first has to do with when you can retire with benefits. PERS benefits, much like Social Security benefits actually, come in essentially two different types. There's the full benefit, meaning you get everything you're entitled to. And then there's the reduced benefit, which means they take what you were entitled to and reduce the amount. For the full benefit, there's, I call them magic numbers. And a lot of times people get these confused. They assume you have to have both, and you really don't. You just need to have one or the other. The first one is 30 years of service. If you have 30 years of service and you're Tier 1 and Tier 2 for sure, then it doesn't matter what your age is. You can retire with full benefits. I've met people that have retired at 52 or 53 with full benefits because they had 30 years of service, which to me is extraordinary. But it can happen. For OPSRP, they extended that just a little bit. It's 30 years of service and at least age 58. I guess they didn't want 52-year-old retirees. So that's years of service. Age doesn't matter in that regard for full benefits. Or the other magic number is age. If you're Tier 1 and at least age 58, you can retire with your full benefit. Doesn't matter how many years of service you have. You can 10 years of service, but at least age 58, that's full retirement. For Tier 2, they bumped it up to age 60. And then sadly for OPSRP, this is one of the big changes why it makes a difference. It's age 65. But meeting those qualifications, years of service or age, doesn't have to be both, you are entitled to full PERS benefits. The other flavor, if you will, is the reduced benefit. So again, they take the full benefit and they reduce it by a factor. We can talk about that in a minute. But if you have less than 30 years of service and don't meet one of those age requirements, then you're looking at a reduced benefit. It's really quite that simple. Now, anybody, Tier 1, Tier 2, or OPSRP can start their PERS pension as early as age 55. But unless you have 30 years of service at age 55, it's going to be at a reduced benefit. Now, the reduction, I used to say it was 8% per year that you were shy of your full benefit. I'm still going to say that simply because it's an easy way to think of it and it's close to being right. There's actually a grid on PERS's website under their actuarial tables that shows you the percentage based on your year and month in regards to how close you are to retirement. So it can be 8%, it can be 16, it can be 24, it could even be 32%. It just depends on how far away you are from full retirement. That being said, I do see a lot of people retire before they have 30 years. Most people are starting to wait until they hit their age benchmark, at least as far as tier 2 is concerned. We'll see how far OPSRP can hang on as we get there. So that's, oh, and one other thing. We'll talk about how pensions are calculated in just a moment, but that reduction stuff I was just talking about does not apply to people that are retiring under the money match calculation, and I'll explain that in a minute. But mostly that would be a tier 1 individual that would retire under money match. So unless you're tier 1, I would just plan on a reduced benefit if that's where you fall. Okay. Next. So what tier you are, this is why that's important. A lot of people find PERS confusing. Big surprise there. The reason for that is because you actually have 2 different types of pension plans. In general terms nationally, there are 2 types of plans. There's a defined benefit plan, which is kind of the old school pension. You know, grandpa worked for GM for 30 years, got the gold watch and a lifetime income, that kind of thing. You don't see that as much anymore, especially not in the private sector. But basically, if you work X number of years, you were guaranteed an income for life. That was a defined benefit. Pretty easy to calculate. You tell me how long you've been working, and I can tell you what your benefit's going to be and what your salary was. What's become more common is the other type of retirement plan, and that's called a defined contribution plan. Most people know these as 401ks, for example. So the employer contributes to an investment, let's say. It's usually a function of salary, a percentage of salary. When you retire, there's no guarantee what the balance is going to be. There's no guarantee how long the money is going to last, but you get whatever is in the account. So it's a defined contribution, not benefit. PERS is confusing because you have both. You have your pension, which is the defined benefit part of it, and you have the IAP account, which is the defined contribution part of it. And we will explain how both of those are accessed as we go along here. But it's important to keep those 2 things in mind, because a lot of people get, I laugh, I probably shouldn't laugh. I've seen people panic because they will get their PERS statement and they'll see a number on it and go, I can't retire on that. Well, you don't have to. That's just the IAP account. That's not how your pension's being calculated. So it's important to keep those 2 separate, even though PERS puts them on the same piece of paper. Okay. So going with the defined benefit part, let's talk about how that's calculated. PERS performs, when you retire, PERS performs 2 or 3 calculations, and you get whichever is highest. The 3 calculations are the full formula calculation, which uses your years of service, kind of like the old school way I was talking about, years of service and final average salary. That's one way they calculate it. Another way they calculate it for tier 1 and tier 2 is they use the person's member balance, member balance, if you will, match it with the employer's balance, and then do some calculations through an annuity table, and we'll look at that, and come up with a pension number that way too. And whichever is highest, that's what the pension is going to be. The third way, don't see much anymore. It was the full formula plus annuity. It was a combination of those 2 methods, and you would need to have been hired before 1982 to even be eligible for it. So again, not seeing that a lot, so I won't spend a lot of time on that. So we'll focus on full formula and money match. I should point out that things, as the tier 1 people have retired and gone into retirement, more and more we're seeing people retire under full formula. Money match is becoming a lot less common. If you just barely made tier 1, you probably would retire under full formula. Money match requires a pretty good sized balance in the member account to do that. If you're tier 2, I can almost guarantee that you're going to retire under full formula. I have seen some tier 2s with money match, but that again is the exception and not the rule. So let's look at full formula for a bit here. Full formula is a simple, straightforward calculation, really. It's actually on your PERS statement. They've started putting it on there, which I think is great. So you can sit down and pencil out what your pension is going to be. It uses your years of service times your final average salary times, I call it an annuity factor, I'm not sure what PERS calls it, of 0.0167 if you are tier 1 or tier 2, and 0.015 if you are OPSRP. So if you plug in X number of years, take a guess at what your average salary is going to be, and we'll talk about how that's calculated, and multiply it by 0.0167, that's your monthly benefit. The final average salary can be interesting to come up with on its own, because it's usually more than what you're currently making. And the reason for that is how they calculate an average of 3. I think it's fuzzy math. So the final average salary is either the 3 highest consecutive years or the last 36 months, whichever is greatest. Then they divide it by 2.8861 to come up with an average of 3. I don't know why. But that gives you your final average salary. I'm going to skip to the bottom of this slide for just a moment, and then I'll bounce back to the middle. This is where sick leave comes into play. When you retire, this is tier 1 and tier 2, I'm afraid, not applicable to OPSRP. When you retire from PPS, PPS reports to PERS your unused sick leave. Not every employer does that. Some employers just cash the members out. PPS has opted to do it this way. So PERS takes half of that time, converts it to money, and applies it to your final average salary. At one point, I thought they actually took the time and applied it to the time and service, but that actually isn't how it's done. They put the monetary value on the last year of your salary. So it makes your last year look even bigger if you've got a fair amount of unused sick leave. I did some calculations on it, and for example, like 500 hours of unused sick leave for someone at the top of the pay scale would equate to roughly a $200 boost per month in the pension. So, you know, it can add up, and it's nice that you do receive at least some benefit from it. But it's also worth pointing out that you lose all of that sick leave at that point. So you don't have access to it as sick leave. And half of it has just disappeared too. But better than nothing. And I've seen people with over 1,000 hours of unused sick leave too. Then again, I've seen people with 0, so your mileage may vary. But it's that final average salary where the sick leave comes into play. Okay. This is me getting on my soapbox just a little bit, but for younger educators, I don't know if it's still true now, but a few years ago, especially when they're making the changes to the OPSRP and doing away with tier 2, and older teachers were telling younger teachers, it's too bad you didn't start sooner. Tier 1, tier 2 are great. OPSRP, the tier 3 is just not as good. I disagree with that, and I put some numbers to it to see what the difference is. So I used a straw person, Miss Straw Teacher. Just all other things being equal, 28 years of service and an average salary of, let's say, $72,000 a year. So all things being equal, a person that is tier 1 or tier 2 doing the full formula calculation would retire with $2,805 per month. Those same variables applied to an OPSRP person using that different annuity factor of 0.015 would see a benefit of $2,520 per month. So less, but I wouldn't say catastrophically so. And PERS's approach to it was that they were going to offset the difference between the two with the IAP account. Keeping in mind, before OPSRP, there was no IAP account. We'll come to that in just a moment. So their idea is not only are you going to get the pension, but because you are presumably a younger person because you're tier 3, you would have the IAP account for a long period of time, and it would grow to a nice big balance, and that would be part of your retirement as well. So although they are different, they're birds of a feather, I think is the way I'd like to put it. So that's how the full formula is sort of works. And like I say, most people now retire under that. If you're curious as to whether or not that's how you're going to retire, an easy way to figure it out is to go on PERS's website, and they have a benefit estimator there. And if you jump through the hoops to do it, it's not too bad. They'll actually pull your information to run the calculation. And at the bottom of the calculation, they'll show you the numbers for full formula and for money match. And whichever is the higher of the two, that's what you're going to retire under. The other one, of course, being that that money match I was talking about. Money match is completely the opposite of everything we just talked about. Money match doesn't care how long you worked, doesn't care how much money you made. Money match is strictly based on the member balance in the tier 1 or tier 2 account. In the middle of your PERS statement, it says member balance. There's a dollar figure. That's the member balance. When you retire, you take that balance and match it to an employer's balance. And so you basically double it. And the way it works is really straightforward, actually. You take that amount, you go onto their actuarial tables, you go by year and month. So age 61, for example, with 8 months gives you a factor of 8. You take your $200,000 member balance, for example, take the employer's $200,000 member balance, multiply it by 8%.008, and you get a benefit of $3,200 a month. Still see this from time to time, but it's becoming less common. If you have a member balance, I would say of less than, let's say $180,000, $200,000, I'm not even sure I would be too concerned about it. You're going to be full formula. But again, you can double check that by running a benefit estimate on PERS. Because you're going to get whichever is highest. You do see this come up quite a bit in the news, though. PERS changes these tables every 2 years now on odd numbered years. So they're not going to do it next year. They'll do it in 2022. And you always hear about it in the news. And it's the tier 1 people, with this grid that they're always saying are getting paid too much and so on and so forth. It's a long story. Most people don't have to worry about it. If they're changing the annuity tables and you're retiring under full formula, which I'm sure most of you are, it doesn't have any impact. Okay, but that's money match. And again, full formula and annuity, I'm not going to go on with that too much because it's pretty rare. Okay. I'll take some questions here in a minute, but first I want to say this. So the question, I've saved this question for after what I just said so that we can talk about the question of whether or not to bubble. To bubble or not to bubble, with apologies to Shakespeare. There are some considerations in deciding whether or not you are going to do the PERS bubble. Some of those considerations are keeping in mind that if you retire under the full formula calculation, what that essentially does is it locks in the amount of time and service that you have for when they do the calculation. So for example, now let's say you were working this school year, but it was going to be your last school year. You didn't know about the bubble. So July 1st was going to be your retirement date. Well, you would have a full school year there, right? But you found out about the bubble. Now you want to retire January 1st, let's say. So to do that, you have to separate from service from PPS. That stops accumulating time and service for that full formula calculation for those 6 months. Something to consider, and we'll talk about the implications of that in a second, but that's one of the consequences. Likewise, with money match, instead of time that you're forfeiting interest on the member balance. The annual interest rate for the fixed account is 7.2%. So if you're giving up, let's say half of it, you're looking at what, 3.5, 3.6% interest. Conversely, we'll call those downsides for want of a better way to look at it. Upside, it does give you the opportunity to collect essentially 2 paychecks for a certain period of time, 6, 7 months, let's say. So you get your paycheck, because keep in mind your net pay doesn't go down while you're doing that. And you start collecting your PERS pension as well. There are some benefits to doing this, not the least of which being it's nice to walk out the door with some cash in hand to do things that need to be done. PERS can take up to 90 days to get their first benefit check out. So if you're worried about a source of income from the time you retire, separate from service, let's say at the end of June, and when the first pension check is going to show up, which let's say is going to be September, late September. And a lot of teachers are on the 12 pay, so they know how to manage that. But some people aren't that excited about that, and so this gives you a pool of money to work with throughout the summer. The other consideration is, and I've got it on the slide here, what I call the crossover calculation. Same thing we do with Social Security, by the way, and trying to figure out when to take that. Is there's a monetary value to the amount of pension you would collect, even though it's less than what it would have been had you not done the bubble. So for example, let's say you're retiring 7 months early, and so that reduces the calculation for full formula by $70 per month, which is ballpark of what we're looking at for your pension. But your pension is going to be $2,640 per month, which, by the way, is the statewide average for PERS pensions, not the $10,000 a month you often see in the newspapers. So it's pretty simple calculation. You take the 2640, multiply it by 7 months, and that gives you $18,480. Then we divide that by the money that you gave up to get it, which is $70 a month, and we find out that it takes 264 months or 22 years for that money you gave up, the $70 a month, to equal the money you walked out the door with, the 18,000 and change. So for most people under the full formula calculation, it makes sense to do the bubble, I think. Everyone has their own situation, and that's not always true. But if I had to pick one answer, I would say, yeah, for most people, the full formula, if they have a full formula calculation, the bubble makes sense. Money match can be a little bit different, and I'm not going to commit myself to yay or nay on that one. And the reason for that is I would want to run the numbers on that first. I have seen situations where I worked with one member balance that was 500,000 and another one that was 750. Well, you match that, and you're looking at $1 million plus. Well, 3.5% interest on $1 million plus is real money, and it didn't pencil out to take it early. But that's the exception and not the rule. So if you are money match and thinking of doing the bubble, but want to make sure it's not a mistake, I'd be happy to crunch the numbers for you. It doesn't take very long. But be aware of that. And the other advantage I would mention is retiring under current PERS. And by that I mean it's not such a big deal this year because it's not a huge legislative year for PERS changes, and they're not changing the annuity tables. But you retire under whatever rules are in place. And so if you like the way PERS looks now, but you're afraid that it's going to look radically different next year or the year after that, then it makes sense to do the bubble and retire now because you know what it looks like. So that's another consideration. Probably just made that really confusing, but the takeaway is the bubble is a good idea for most people, but not necessarily everybody. I hope that helped. Okay, before we go on to the really exciting retirement income options, how are we doing on questions?
We've got a few questions. I think
Okay.
some of them are a little individual, but I think maybe you have some kind of general answers you can provide. So I'll throw them out there in the order by which they came to us. So Maud asked, would it make much of a difference if I retire by December 31st, 2020, or wait until January 2021? So wait another year.
Okay, waiting. That's a good question, actually. The short answer is the difference from 1 month to the next is pretty small, and it's offset. And by that I mean, yes, you miss out on potentially collecting 1 month's worth of pension, but you're also adding 1 month's worth of service to the pension calculation. You are also adding another month's contribution to the IAP account. So that all offsets. Obviously more is better, but 1 month next to after the other really doesn't make that big a difference. Year to year is a little bit different. For a person that is essentially close to or at full retirement eligibility, I am finding that, and it differs, of course, depending upon how many years you have in and what your salary is, but generally speaking, just as a rule of thumb to get the conversation going, I would say a person's monthly benefit goes up by, I want to say between $150 and let's say $200, $210 per month of pension for each additional year worked. Again, I can get specific with your individual circumstances, but just to kind of get the ball rolling, how much is it worth working another year? Well, that's the question. Is it worth an additional, let's say, $150, $200 a month for a lifetime? Hopefully that answers that question. Month to month, not a big deal. Year to year, depends on how you feel about it.
Yeah, no, that's helpful, I think. The next question is from Victor Cummings. And
oh yeah, hi Victor.
If he retires on January 1st, 2021, and works the PERS bubble until June. When does his health insurance benefit for his son end?
Ah, that actually is in the contract. Of course, I probably can't find it off the top of my head, but I can email you that answer. I'm sorry I didn't get back to you sooner. I want to say, it has to do with when the district actually pays the premium to the trust. So I want to say it's August 1st, but it might be the end of August. But I can get you that specific information. Definitely through the rest of the school year, and I believe all of July. But I'll keep my eyes open for the answer on that one. Here we go. Yeah, it's through July 31st. There.
Very definitive. And then the next one is from Catherine Yarlot. She wrote, she was told that the year she turned 65 would work. She's OS PRP, not 30 years, but that she didn't have to actually be 65 in the month that she retired. Is that true, or will her benefits be reduced?
From everything I've read, they base it on your age on your retirement date. So if your retirement date is 5 days before you turn 65, they're going to look at it as 64 and 11 months. Well, I have many teachers who have waited 1 month so that they fall into the right age bracket before they retire. That's everything I've seen. Now, if PERS has told you different, I would want to see where they're getting that from, but that's my take on it.
And I had two separate questions, but they're fairly straightforward, so I'll just throw them together. The first one was the pension amounts that you put out for examples, are those before or after taxes? And then the second question was, does the 3 highest consecutive years mean any time within your career?
To answer the last question first, yes. 3 highest consecutive years doesn't have to be the last 3 years. They do look at the last 3 years, which I found out recently, the last 36 months, because some people do retire in the middle of a year and that's their highest earning years. But they do look at the highest 3 consecutive. So for example, and it's a good question because it comes up a lot. One of the questions I get a lot is, well, what if I've worked 20 plus years, I've been at the top of the pay scale for the last X number of years. How big a hit am I going to take if I work part-time that last year? And the answer is usually not really that big, because what PERS is going to do, unless your salary increased dramatically in your last year, they're going to go back to the highest 3. So it could be anywhere during the career, just as long as it's consecutive.
And then just the last one is also pretty simple. And with the bubble, would you lose your emergency personal days?
Yeah, I want to say yes. But you might actually know more about that than I do.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
I know you lose professional development, and there was another one, but it sounds like personal days as well. Yeah. Okay.
That's it.
All right. Well, those are good questions. So retirement, we've talked about when can you retire and how the retirement benefit is calculated. So you've decided to retire. What options are available to you? PERS, in their effort to make it as complicated as possible, has come up with 13 different choices. I'm going to narrow it down to 3. But even before I do that, I want to talk about one other decision that needs to be made. And this really only applies to Tier 1 for the most part. And that is, one of the options or one of the questions on the retirement form, PERS retirement paperwork, is whether or not to move the money that you have in the variable account and your member balance to the fixed account. I recommend yes. And the reason for that is the fixed account earns as good or better than the variable account over time. The other reason is that if you leave money in the variable account when you retire, because of market forces, it's possible you would see some fluctuation in your pension payment. Probably not a lot, because most people only have a small percentage of their member balance in the variable accounts, but it could result in some fluctuation. Most of the people I work with or have talked with would like their pension check not to fluctuate, or if it was going to fluctuate, only go up. So I would recommend moving to the fixed account. That being decided, everybody else has to decide everyone has to decide what they're going to do. There are basically three choices. Are you going to take a monthly income for life? Are you going to take, if you're tier 1 or tier 2, the member balance instead, the cash, and not take a pension for life? Or are you going to split it, take your member balance and make a pension out of the matching employer's balance? Again, tier 1 and tier 2. OPSRP really only has one choice, and that's a pension for life. Darn, right? Okay, so that's really how it boils down. The pension, far and away, is what people choose. When you make that decision, you then have to decide in what fashion you're going to take it. And it's not as complicated as PERS makes it out to be. You'll notice my little stick people on this slide. This wasn't my idea. I was working with a teacher, and I was trying to explain what the different options were. And I said, you need to look at it from PERS's point of view. PERS is trying to figure out how long they're going to be on the hook paying an income to somebody, a lifetime, let's say. Could be one lifetime, that's just the retiree. Could be 2 lifetimes, could be the retiree and potentially the spouse or partner. Or it could be some variation thereof. She's like, oh, well, the easy way to see that would be like with stick people, 1, 1, 2, and then 1.5. And I drew the half without the head, which didn't look right. So she suggested just cutting the stick figure in half. I'm like, okay. So that's how that came about. But I think it does help clarify it. So from PERS's point of view, option 1. Option 1 guarantees an income for life for the retiree. In fact, all of these options guarantee an income for life for the retiree, but nobody else. Because of that, it's the highest payout. They know they're going to be on the hook for just one lifetime. That you can hedge it a little bit with the refund annuity or the 15-year certain. There's some different kind of nuance to that. So if you were seriously considering option 1, I can explain at length what the difference is there. But a short summary would be, if the retiree were to die before they had been paid back everything they had paid in to PERS, then a beneficiary would receive the remainder. That's what the options are for option 1. But again, as far as lifetime income is concerned, it's just for the retiree. The next option is option 2. 2 lives, and that worked out pretty well. So we got 2 stick people. So it guarantees a lifetime income for the retiree and for the spouse or partner if the retiree dies. So potentially 2 lifetimes. Because of that, it is the lowest amount that you could get. But they call it the 100% survivor option again, because the surviving beneficiary would get the same pension as the retiree was getting. There's one nuance to that, and that's the A option. The A option is called the pop-up option, and that allows for this, the opposite scenario. What if the named beneficiary predeceases the retiree? Well, then the retiree can pop back up to option 1, the highest amount, because now PERS knows it's only covering that one lifetime. The reason they know that is because after 60 days from the date you receive your first pension payment, you can't make any changes. So whoever your beneficiary is going to be, named beneficiary, after 60 days, that's who the beneficiary is going to be. So if they die first, you can't put somebody else on there. They know that, so you can pop back up to option 1. And there's a small fee associated with that convenience, and so it's a little bit less than just plain old option 2. But it's a good option for a variety of reasons. There could be a substantial difference in age between the retiree and the beneficiary. Statistically, women outlive men. So, there's some moving parts to that, and it makes a lot of sense in some cases. Option 3 is very much like option 2, but instead of the beneficiary receiving exactly what the retiree was getting, they get 50% of what the retiree was getting. It's unfortunate that it's 50% in my mind and not 70. 70, I think, would be better. That's what Washington offers, but it is what it is. So because it's 50%, it's a little bit more than option 2, but still less than option 1, because they are on the hook. PERS is on the hook for, let's call it half a lifetime or half a stick figure. It also has an A option for the pop-up, so you can go that route with it. In this example, the retiree would receive $2,953 per month. If the retiree died The beneficiary would continue to receive a pension, but it would be half of that. I looked at the numbers in PERS, and the most common are obviously 1 and 2. 3 isn't quite as common, but I do see it. I see it in situations where maybe they have other assets that they know that the beneficiary could draw on if something were to happen. Maybe the beneficiary has their own pension, but it's not quite as good as the PERS, things of that nature. So it does come up. But those are the big 3. So knowing that you're going to take the pension, that's one big decision out of the way. And then looking at these options, if you can narrow it down, for example, if you're single and don't want to leave money to anybody, option 1, done. If you have a partner and want to leave money to them, well, then you've got to decide between option 2 or option 3. Don't worry about option 1. So hopefully that simplifies it a little bit. The last thing I'd like to say about it is for option 2 and option 3, when we're talking about the survivor or beneficiary, remember what I said, most pensions now are calculated under full formula, which isn't age driven. It's years of service, salary, and that annuity factor. The beneficiary's age, not the retirees, but the beneficiary's age does come into play when you are choosing these options. Again, from PERS's point of view, they're trying to figure out how long they might be making a payment. So it's inadvisable to put someone as the beneficiary on a option 2 or option 3 that has a substantially younger age than the retiree. Because PERS is going to look at it and go, well, the retiree is 58, that's great. Oh my gosh, the beneficiary is 30. Well, no. And they're, in their mind, they're thinking they might be making payments for the next 30 years, 40 years. And so they're going to lower the pension accordingly. So it's not a great idea to put children as the beneficiary on your PERS pension. There are other options, other ways to deal with children, of course, as far as setting them up for a benefit. But setting them up as your pension beneficiary is rarely advisable. So please be aware of that. Okay, so for PERS, those are the options. Hopefully not as bad as maybe you were thinking. The IAP account, let's move on to that, because there's, I wouldn't say options involved with it, but I'll put this out. It's gotten more complicated than it used to be. Then it used to be that 6% of an educator's paycheck, for example, was routed to the member balance. So it either went into the regular account or the variable account, depends on if you were tier 1 or tier 2. But that's where that member balance came from, that they eventually run through that annuity table and come up with the money match calculation. Well, when they created the OPSRP tier 3 structure, they rerouted it. They stopped contributing to the member balance and instead started a whole new program called the Individual Account Program, IAP. On Fridays, it's IPA. Most people have heard of a 401k. This is actually a 401a, essentially the same thing, but you're public employee as opposed to private, and so that's why it's an A. The member balance for the tier 1 and tier 2 people, it's still there and it's still matched. It's just no new contributions have gone into it since 2004. So that's what happened to that. So the IAP account is where the money has been going. Up until this year, it was 6% of your gross pay, pre-tax. Senate Bill 1049 last year changed that, and it went into effect July 1st of this year. So now, that's why I crossed out now, and now it's another then. Now, for tier 1 and tier 2, instead of 6% going into the IAP account, it is now 3.5% of your gross pay. The difference, 2.5%, is going into, they have a special name for it, but essentially it's an account to help pay for pensions, to help PERS stay solvent. So you're not going to see the money yourself. OPSRP didn't take quite as big a hit. It's still 5.25% is still going into the IAP account. And the reason for that is, like we talked about earlier, with that lower annuity factor, the IAP account it plays a larger role in the OPSRP retirement. So to hit it as hard would have been cruel, frankly, unkind. So how big a deal is that? Well, for people that are planning on retiring, because the effect, it just started in this July. If you're retiring this year, frankly, the impact is pretty small. If you're still 10 years out and you're tier 2, let's say, well, it might have a little bit of an impact if you were counting on a very large IAP balance as part of your retirement. So we'd want to sit down and figure out how much are we coming short, what can we do about it. Kind of the small print down there is PERS's idea of addressing it. And it says you can make additional after tax, which I thought was interesting, by the way. So their contributions are before tax. Your contributions would be after tax. After tax contributions to be deducted by your employer of 2.5% if you're tier 1 or tier 2, or 0.75 if you're OPSRP, and routed into the IAP account. So you can make up the difference to have that full 6%. You could even do it retroactively to July, but that would need to be done this month. My 2 cents on that, and keeping in mind, yes, I'm a little biased by this because I'm a financial advisor. If it were me, I would prefer to take the difference and route it into my own 403B or TSA. 1, it's more accessible than the IAP account is going to be. 2, you have more control over how it's invested. 3, you have more control over the amount of contribution. So, and you can decide whether or not if it's going to be traditional or Roth, in other words, before or after tax. So if you're interested in making up what is no longer being contributed to the IAP, I'm happy to help point you in the right direction. But that's what's going on with the IAP. So that's the defined contribution amount. It's just the contribution has gotten smaller this year. So most of this we've covered. Again, it's before tax, it's a 401A, invested in the market. Oh, target funds. So how is it invested? When I said you have more options with the TSA, just a little bit of history. It used to be that the IAP account was invested pretty close to how the variable account was being invested for tier 2, for want of a better way to put it, let's say aggressively. They now, in an effort to try to mitigate the risk associated with it, they've decided to come up with what they call target funds. What a target fund is it's a mix of investments, funds, with a specific goal in mind. In this case, the target is age 65. So what they do is they look at your age and whatever your relationship is to age 65, that helps determine what target fund you're in. The idea being that as you get closer to age 65, the investment becomes more conservative. Let's just say as you get closer to age 65, there are going to be more bonds and less stocks. Conversely, if you're younger, you're 20 years out from retirement, you're going to have more stocks and less bonds than someone that's 5 years away from age 65. So that's how they have that set up, and that's how it was set up automatically. Once a year, you can go in now, and they just started this year as well. It was part of the Senate bill. You can tell them which target funds you would like to have money in. So if you want to be more aggressive or less aggressive, you can do that. They make the change once a year. I think the deadline for that just ended in September. That takes effect January 1. So next year, you'll have another opportunity in the month of September to change the lineup for the following January if you want to adjust which target funds you're in. That's the extent of control that you have over it. But frankly, it's better than what it was. As far as options when you retire, basically there are 1. You have to take it. It's option WYSIWYG. What you see is what you get. It used to be that you could, in fact, let it ride. You could leave the IAP account in there, just take the pension, get to the IAP when you needed it. For a variety of reasons, that's no longer an option. So there's really 2 choices. You can leave it with PERS, but you have to take systematic distributions if you decide to do that over a 5, 10, 15, or 20-year period of time. Or you can roll the money out. You could take the money and put it directly into your checking account, but you probably wouldn't want to do that because keep in mind, the money hasn't been taxed yet. So that would be a taxable event. It would be added to your income for the year, taxed accordingly. Uncle Sam would say, thank you very much. So what most people do is they roll the money either to an IRA or to a 403B so that they have control over how it's invested, when the money comes out, how much comes out, and so they can control how much tax liability they're going to have from it in any given year. One other option, though, to be aware of, when you do the retirement paperwork, You can actually split the IAP. Some of it can go to an investment, and some of it can, in fact, go to your checking account. And you can decide how much where, more or less. And I actually have done this fairly often. What happens is people retire and maybe they need a new roof, or they want tires for the car, or they've got a bill they'd like to pay off, or they need to set up a, let's say, a security fund, something like that. So it is possible to peel off, 10, 20, whatever, $1,000 and put it into any account. It doesn't have to be an IRA, and then send the rest to an IRA. Keeping in mind that the amount that you peel off and put into your checking account, that's a taxable event. Taxes will have to be paid on that. So you could go wild and crazy, but it's expensive. But it's nice that that option's there. So there is a pool of money there to work with really as soon as you start retirement from PERS. And that's the caveat. You cannot access the IAP account until you retire from PERS. In fact, it's done on the same paperwork as your PERS pension. So, but that's the IAP account. To kind of just hit the rest of what happened and why those changes were made. I know this applies to just about everybody here, but they had to go ahead and cap the salary for the full formula calculation at $195,000 a year. So I'm sorry for those of you that were making more than that. The other big one though, and this impacts a lot of people, is the work after retirement provision. Normally, the way that works is when a person retires from PERS, they can go back and work in a PERS covered position. Let's say 6 months after they retire, they come back to PPS as a substitute teacher. That's fine. Normally, however, there's an hourly cap, and that is for Tier 1 and Tier 2, 1,039 hours. If you exceed that amount, there are financial consequences to doing that. For OPSRP, it is 600 hours. It's important to track it because obviously school years are different than calendar years, and PERS uses a calendar year. So something to keep in mind. Now, they did away with that for the next 4 years. So from 2020 through 2024, the 1,039 hour cap or the 600 hour cap for OPSRP is for many people no longer relevant. After 2024, we'll have to see what happens, but it was done as a way to, I think, help offset some of the consequences of passing this Senate bill and trying to save PERS some money. Because if you think about it, it gets people to start, instead of accumulating more pension, they're retiring and doing the work and not earning any more pension. So it actually saves money for PERS. I think that's why they did it. But it's something to be aware of, and it's nice to have that flexibility. Now, I said just about everybody would qualify for that. We could probably put this on if it's not already on the PAT website. I believe it's on PPS's website, and I got it off of PERS's website, so it's out there, and I'd be happy to send it to you if you need it. But it's a neat little kind of flow chart that shows you whether or not you would be subject to that hourly cap. And it's pretty straightforward. Let's say you're Tier 2. Let's say you don't qualify for full retirement yet. You're age 58. So then the next question becomes, well, have you had a break from all PERS covered employment for at least 6 months since your retirement date? If your answer is yes, then there are no hourly limitations for how much you can work in a PERS covered position after that 6 months. If the answer is no, then the 1,040 hour cap applies. So using that fairly simple chart, you can figure out, is the hourly cap going to apply to you? And because of the way the healthcare situation is structured in the Portland School District, for most people, it's not going to be a limit. There's a 6 month waiting period before you get hired back. So that works out pretty well. Oh yeah, one last PERS consideration here, and then I'll take some more questions. I just ran across this. This is a result of COVID, actually. When we sit down and do PERS paperwork, your resignation from your retirement paperwork from PERS needs to be signed in front of a notary and notarized. The first page does. Everything else doesn't have to be notarized, just that first page. And also your spouse or partner signature, if you choose one of those benefit options, that has a spousal benefit. Well, obviously with COVID, that can be problematic or has been problematic. So they put this little caveat in here, and I'll just go ahead and read it. If you're having difficulties finding a notary for your service retirement application, you can submit your application without notarization and later submit the page once it's completed. PERS now accepts documents with remote online notarization by vendors that meet the requirements of the Oregon Secretary of State. In other words, an authorized notary should know at this point how to do an online notarization, and that will work. The reason that's important is all forms still must be received before your effective retirement date. PERS paperwork to retire from PERS, let me back up a little bit. I said at the beginning that PERS retirements start at the first of each month, so January 1, for example. PERS doesn't care when you turn in the paperwork, so long as you turn it in before your retirement date. So you could turn it in December 31st if it's a work day, and that would be okay. But if you turn it in January 2nd, they're going to send it back to you and say, try for February. So it's got to be in before your retirement date. Doing pretty fair here. We'll maybe take a moment to see if there's any questions. Is that?
Yeah, not too many questions, Ed, but
Okay.
one I think is relevant to what we just went over, and comes from Alex, who asked, after he retires from PPS, can he go to another state like Florida and teach full time without incurring any losses per his benefit?
Yeah, actually, I was going to mention that at some point. I hope I didn't forget. Yeah, actually, that was going to be on the next slide. But the answer is yes. PERS only cares if you work in another PERS, Oregon PERS, covered position. So once you retire from PERS, you can do whatever you want. If you work for a non-Oregon PERS employer, they don't care how many hours you work or even how much money you make or any of that. So yeah, feel free.
And somebody just asked a follow-up question. I'm not sure if you did answer this, but in terms of the calculations of the monthly.
I can't hear you there.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yeah. So somebody asked that with respect to the figures that you're putting out about monthly payments, benefits, was that before or after taxes?
Oh yeah, I'm sorry. So all of the numbers I have been talking about, whether it be the PERS pension, the stipend, the early retirement incentive, all of that is before tax. The reason I use that is when you run an estimate on the PERS benefit calculator, for example, that's going to be before taxes are taken out. When you see Social Security statements, that's before taxes are taken out. Unfortunately, most of the numbers that you see in terms of projections for what you can expect for income in the future are before taxes. I suspect the reason is people's tax rates differ. General rule of thumb, I use 15 or so, 16 for federal and 9 for state, just to kind of get the ball rolling. But yeah, it's before taxes are taken out.
Now, with respect to working after retirement, is there a restriction based on the size of the school district? Does that matter?
Yeah, actually, I mean, for Oregon, I tried to keep it simple. There is some moving parts to it, though. The hourly cap, again, it being more or less suspended until 2024. But after that, even before they suspended the hourly cap, there were exceptions made for certain size schools, rural school districts, certain professions, like I think special ed was one of them, speech path might have been another, and then I know there's another one. And I can find the specifics on it, but there were exceptions to it because they needed people in those positions. So yeah, certainly.
Gotcha. And then same person asked this question that you mentioned variable. Was that the IAP account that you're talking about?
Yeah, the variable account is really a function of tier one. Tier one people could decide when that 6% came out of their paycheck, how much was going to go into the fixed account and how much was going to go into a little bit more wild and crazy variable account. And it got pretty wild and crazy there for a while. Tier two, by the way, was always variable. It didn't have a fixed account. But it's separate from and completely different than the IAP account. They're two different investments. Yeah.
And then just one final question. Can you speak to buying back years if you taught in another state and or had military service?
Yeah. There are, I want to say 7 actual, maybe even more than that, different types of buybacks you can do. When we say buyback, what we're talking about is buying back time that otherwise wouldn't be included in the pension calculation. The most common is the waiting period. If you look at your PERS statement, you'll see that there's a hire date and a membership date. And usually there's a 6 to 8 month difference between those two dates. PERS, when you ask for an estimate of benefits, will include what it would cost to buy back those, let's say, 6 or 8 months. In that case, most of the time it's actually worth doing that buyback. Other types of buybacks can get more expensive. Out-of-state teaching time is one of them. Forfeited time is a huge one that's expensive. Military time is another one you can buy back. You can buy back, when we say buy back, what you're actually doing is buying in to adding it to your calculation. And the way they figure it out, you can buy up to 4 years. It could be out-of-state teaching time, could be military time, so on. And they add the 4 years to your time in service. But the way they figure out how much it's going to cost is by figuring out how much it's going to increase your benefit and charging you accordingly. So there's actually there's a table on PERS's website that shows that can help estimate what the cost would be if you're really serious about doing an expensive buyback. The other thing you can do is when you submit an estimate, a written estimate to PERS, a request for a written estimate to PERS, there's a section at the bottom of that form that asks, are you going to be buying back, excuse me, out-of-state teaching time? Where, how much, that kind of thing. And even if you're not 100% sure you want to do it, I would say go ahead and put it in. And that way you can kind of figure out what it's going to cost and how much it would help increase your benefit. Not everybody does it. Most everybody buys back the waiting time. I'm going to go 50-50 on the other types of buybacks.
Cool. Thanks, Ed.
Sure.
That was the last question I had. I don't know if you have any more slides or.
Yeah, no, I've got just a couple more.
Okay, beautiful.
Because, you know, look, I guess the kind of circling back, we're getting close to the end, but circling back to the beginning, should I stay or should I go? Well, again, kind of like the bubble, one size doesn't fit all. There are some considerations. And those considerations include, were you close to retirement anyway? If the answer was yes, you know, if you were going to retire this year anyhow, then yeah, it seems like a good year to go, in my opinion. If you were not maybe planning on retiring this year, keeping fingers crossed for a less interesting next year, you know, maybe not. Another consideration would be, do you like your job? And I mean that seriously. I know that educators love teaching. I know they love their kids. I know they give their heart and soul to that part of their job that helps other people. I know they also do not like a lot of the stuff that goes on beyond that. But I have met educators that are resistant to retirement because they really do love walking into work each day. If that's the case, should I stay or should I go? You know, hard to answer that one. Conversely, if it's affecting your mental health, your hair's starting to fall out, you dread getting up in the morning, you know, maybe it's a good year to go. So that's a consideration. Another one would be if you calculate your pension now and calculate it for a year or so from now, is the difference between those two worth the time and stress? That's a question only you can answer. And I'm happy to help try to figure out what those numbers are. But again, ultimately, it's your decision. You know, how much is it worth to you? That's another part of the equation. Probably the biggest one, though, that I get is, can you afford to retire? And again, your mileage is going to vary, but the general rule of thumb is this in my industry. It's recommended that a person retire with 70% of their pre-retirement income. So if you sit down and add up what you can expect from PERS, and keeping in mind, going back to the other question, which is a good one, gross or before or after tax, when we look at how much money you need, I usually approach it as a function of how much of your net pay do you need when you go into retirement. Because if you look at your gross number, it's big, but there's a lot of stuff that comes out of that you never see. So going with the net number, then adding up all the gross numbers from your PERS, Social Security, maybe other investments, and then taking taxes off of that. If that number comes in at about 70% of what your current net take-home pay is, then you're in the ballpark. I think 70 personally is a little bit low. I like 75 to 80. But if you're anywhere in that spectrum, 68, fine. You're close to being able to say, yeah, I can do it. If there's a broad discrepancy, then we would really need to take a look at it and see if it's such a great idea. But that's how to approach that question. The other important thing I think is to keep in mind is to retire to something, not from something. And by that I mean, should I stay or should I go? It's like, well, what are you going to do if you go? If you're going to go do something that you love to do and it's going to make getting up every day exciting, hey, that's a great argument for going. If conversely you're thinking, I don't know what I'm going to do, I'm just going to sit on the couch and turn into a potato, well, that's not a great argument for going. So retire to something, not from something. And then speaking to the hourly work and working in Florida, for example, there are other careers, non-PERS covered positions. You can do whatever you would like to do, and it's not going to impact your pension. So even if you're leaving the school district and retiring from PERS, that doesn't mean you're calling it quits, right? So that's a consideration as well. And lastly, in figuring out some of that, whether or not you can afford to retire, Social Security. You can access your Social Security starting at age 62. Everybody can. Like PERS, there's a difference. There's a reduced benefit, 62, and then there's a full benefit, 66, 67, depending upon when you were born. Whether or not it's worth taking Social Security early, there's some moving parts to that. It used to be a general rule of thumb that, yeah, you would take it as soon as you could get it because the life expectancy wasn't much past 65 or 67. So waiting till 65 or 67 didn't make a whole lot of sense. With where mortality, COVID aside, is at now, there's some wiggle room there. If you have longevity in your family, everybody lives to be 90. Yeah, that's a strong argument to wait until you're 67 or 70 to take your Social Security. But not everybody's like that. The other way I like to look at it is Social Security would like you to wait until age 70 before you take it. Well, that tells you something. But that, if Social Security is going to help you live the way you want to live and you really want to go, well, that's what it's for. So there you go. That's basically everything I had for this evening. Just kind of a brief review of what I can do for you and how this all works. You'll notice that my email was down at the bottom of every slide. Feel free to email me. I'll try to answer any questions you have. If you'd like to get together for an appointment, happy to do that. I love working with teachers, and I have for many years, and that's what I do. I get compensated. You don't have to pay me, by the way, not straight out of the gate anyways. So happy to sit down and do a review. I get compensated either by whatever investments we end up using, or if you're good to go or you already have somebody else working with you, that's fine. I also get compensated by you spreading the word about me. That's how I do my advertising. So, we'll work something out. It's not a big deal. And I can do fee for service if that's what you'd like to do. I'm happy to do it, but I haven't really had to do that much. So that's what I do, help people figure out the answers to some of these questions. So hopefully we've clarified a little bit about what the district has to bring to the table, how the PERS is calculated and what options are available when you take it, what the IAP account is all about, keeping in mind that it is separate from your pension. Recent PERS changes mostly having to do with how many hours you can work in retirement, and when you can retire from PERS. So I think, yep, and then just contact information. So are there any other questions? We've got a little bit of time left. We did well, actually. 6 o'clock on the nose.
Beautiful. Thank you. I don't see any questions, but if people did want to ask some. Now is a good time. We can take a few minutes to catch up with you guys. Feel free to either use the Q&A box or raise your virtual hand and I will call on you.
Yeah. This is different.
Yeah.
Kind of next time I'll have to figure out a way to put like a palm tree behind there.
Yeah, I'll teach you those tricks, Ed. You can get virtual backgrounds or a real life palm tree. It's hard to tell.
I think one like floating in space would be fun.
Okay, got a few questions coming in. So somebody asked if, because we are recording this, will they have access? Yes, you will. We're gonna review it, and if we may need to edit. I don't think we will, but so definitely by next week we'll have it up on the PAT website and our YouTube channel. Victor says thank you, Ed.
Oh.
Stacy says thank you. So not
Thank you very
questions,
much.
but praise and thanks. So thank you guys. And just to
Yes.
let you know, this is the first in a series of workshops that Ed is going to do for us this year. And the next couple will be aimed at people in different stages of their career, not quite contemplating retirement yet, but both for kind of mid-career people and also for some of our newer educators, you know, trying to figure out some financial planning and thinking ahead. It'll be kind of geared towards those folks. So please, again, like I said, spread the word, and we'll definitely put some stuff out there soon. So yeah, for anybody who missed like the first part of the presentation, it will be available as a recording, and we'll also put up some of the other material on the PAT website soon. So keep your eyes peeled for that. Otherwise, I would just bid you all good night. I'm sure you've had a lot of screen time already today, so I don't, you know, very conscious of that. And yeah, I just wanted to say thank you to Ed again, and to all of you guys for coming and sharing your time with us. So
Thank you all very much.
all right, everybody, have a great night and look forward to talking to you soon. Take care.